Okay. So,
So basically, we had much more experience in tourism land visits. So the park organized the first kind of basic land guide courses in the 70s. And so we had much more experience people guiding on land and snorkeling. And then in the 80s, more and more divers showed up. And some of the land guides, because I was a land guide, slipped into it, taking people to dive. And so the need to have more people diving and doing land visits and being a dive guide growth. But I would say in the 80s there were only 3 or 4 boats offering a mixture between land visits and diving on the same time on the living on board boats. But they were not made for diving. They were like sailing boats, very small, not too much place for the tanks and for the compressor. So it was like improvising a lot. So like example on the Cachalote, that I went up to Wolfendaven to scout out Wolfendaven with David Day, this British guide. It was only for 10 divers, that sailing boat, very tight, and so we were checking out the dive sites on Wolfendaven. But only for 10 divers, so on a small sailing yacht. Of course, the divers from that time were very good divers, the Germans and the Swiss and the Austrians. They had a good logbook with 400, 500, 1,000 dives. So those pioneer divers were really good divers. So we scouted out Wolfendawen. On that time there was another nice sailing boat, Encantada. And the Encantada was owned on that time by Metropolitan Touring. And they were doing also sometimes dive trips up to Wolfendaven. So when I was with the Cachalote there, I saw the Encantada also anchoring there and diving on the left or right side where we were. But on that time, I would say in the 80s, the only boats that would try to dive sometimes on Wolfendaven, what is now a very famous dive area, was the Cachalote and the Encantada, nobody else. Going every 2 or 3 weeks, one trip, or one trip per month, scouting out. Later, other boats followed, like Reina Silvia. And then, of course, in the beginning of the 90s, then I would say, well, there were other ones diving around here, like Lamerlo in the 80s, 90s. But the two really professional dive boats that came in, really made for diving, with with tables for photographers, and really a dive platform with strong compressors and nitrox and all this and that and that and that. That was the Aggressor fleet with 2 boats. And then I swapped over from the local kind of smaller boats to Aggressor on 91. And I took some of the dive guides that worked before on the other boats with me to be part of the crew of Aggressor fleet.
Jaime?
Jaime Navas, some Navy people like Richard Vera, Victor Mendia, because there were not enough dive guides in Galapagos, so we went over to the SEALs from Ecuador to convince some SEALs, Navy SEALs from Ecuador, to quit to be Navy SEALs and to enjoy the tourism industry, because there were not enough people available like dive guides on that time. So we built a really nice crew between people from Galapagos and well-trained Navy SEALs to give perfect service on that time on the water for guests.
One of the things Jaime said to me was that back then, North Seymour would have huge populations of hammerheads and mantas and other marine life, so there was really no need to go north to Darwin and Wolf because the diving was so good in the Central Islands. Do you agree?
It was good. I mean, I think so. I have somewhere some footage of that, but on high 8 cameras. I filmed on high 8 cameras. Well, wildlife in the central part was great. But I mean, we had some good schools of hammerhead sharks on Gordon Rocks and North Seymour. And on that time, we had also in that area in around Mosquera and North Seymour more Galapagos sharks. And that changed. Hard to say why. The Galapagos sharks disappeared maybe because of the years of illegal shark fishing that we had and shark finning that we had in the 90s. And the black tips took over that area for many years. And so hammerheads, they're less now on the dive sites that we loved before. And North Seymour, Mosquera, Gordon Rocks, still nice schools, 30, 40, 50. But yeah, before we have the impression that we saw more in the central part, But of course, once we were going more often to Wolfendauen, we found out that there are whale sharks and that they're showing up when the cold weather comes in between June, July, and November, December. So that was like a new kind of candy on the cake, So it was the combination of big Galapagos sharks, big schools of hammerhead sharks, and of course the whale sharks. And main reason later why people wanted to go to Wolfendamme was to see the whale sharks, because that was like, oh, I want to go to Wolfendamme, but when are the whale sharks over there? And maybe it was our mistake to advertise too much the whale sharks, because then we put all the dive boats into whatever. The dive boats were full between June and November, and then after that empty between January and May, because everybody wanted to see the whale sharks. So maybe, because the rest of the year it's also nice to dive in Wolfendamme, even if there are less whale sharks. Because if you do the combination of Wolfendamme and other islands on the west side of Isabella, you have a nice combination. And because Galapagos is not only hammerhead sharks and whale sharks, you have different ecosystems. You have marine iguanas feeding algae on the water and all that. But maybe the mistake was of the dive companies to advertise too much Darwin with the whale sharks, but had put them into a corner to only get people between June and November. Maybe that was a mistake, an advertisement mistake.
So, safety laws, safety regulations, how are those who came up with those and when were any actually put into use? Some of the early boats were not necessarily safe boats, they were explorers. So tell me, you've written, I know I somewhere probably still have a copy of your incredible dive briefing that covers a lot of safety issues. Tell me more about the origins of safety as a priority in diving here.
Yeah, when I dove with the Germans and the Swiss, they were teaching me basically that, hey, you know what, maybe it would be good to increase a little more the safety arguments, because they had dive bases on other parts on Earth, in the Red Sea and somewhere in Italy. And I had a great mentor, guru, teacher. His name is Walter Gungbühl, and he had several dive bases in Sharm el-Sheikh and Hurghada and Italy, and so he was a great teacher. So basically he trained me to give very detailed briefings to explain a lot the dive sites so people can use the pre-information and also safety arguments to minimize possible accidents. So I owe that basically to Walter Guggenbühl, a Swiss dive instructor who is now over 80 years old, and he's kind of legend in Switzerland. He's the guru of diving in Europe. I was lucky to find a person like that who invested time in me. So I went even to his dive bases to Egypt and to his dive base to Italy, in Isola d'Elba. And he's like my godfather, I would say, that taught me how to be very professional in a Swiss way, what means a lot. Because Swiss people are even more detailed than the German people sometimes. So,
Wow.
so basically I absorbed and adopted that very professional briefings and explanations to put it in part of that into Aggressor, and later part of that into our dive base Scooby One.
So let's move back to Scooby Iguana. When did you begin operations at Scooby Iguana?
Yeah, I worked for Aggressor between 91 and 95 full time. In 95, I started Scuiwana half of my time, and half of my time I continued with Aggressor 1 year more. So we started with Scuiwana very slow, with one speedboat in 95, waiting for backpack tourists to come into the town. We didn't have internet, no websites. It was like kind of indirect advertisement, and the first year we had basically young divers from Israel. So the main language spoken by my first group of tourists the first 10 months was Hebrew. And those were ex-army people that finished the army, the military service in Israel, and then after that they had some money to travel around South America. And they were the ones coming into the town when this town had close to zero tourism, and started to spend money in the town because of our first 2 or 3 dive shops that we started on 95. And there was one person that started a little earlier, Fernando Zambrano with Subaqua.
Yeah.
And he started in 92, something like that.
Which was basically where Banco del Pacifico is now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So he was the first pioneer, definitely, who started. Who started day dive was Fernando Zambrano in 92. We followed, Vicente Verdonces with Naughty Diving and myself in 95. Yeah, basically, we were the pioneers on that time,
Wow. It's hard to imagine. I mean, there are still you see a lot of Israeli kids coming here, walking the streets to dive, going to different dive shops, so that makes perfect sense.
They came back now. For many years, I didn't saw them. And now I see them coming back. For many, I had different nationalities. First, the people from Israel, then Europeans, then step more Americans. Then the market from the United States was important up to 2008, and when we had this financial crisis all over the banks, then the market shrunk from the United States. Still from Europe, we had some peaks of other nationalities, like from Brazil for a couple of years when the economy was doing very well in Brazil for 2 years or something like that. Now we are back to everything. Some Americans, some Europeans.
Australians.
Yeah, not so often. That's so far, we had even at time Japanese divers on the beginning between 96, 7, 98, 2000. Seems to be that the economy in Japan also was doing a little better.
And you've had some celebrity divers here.
Yeah, Sylvia Earle dove with us, Leonardo DiCaprio, Hollywood movie stars. Yeah, different people that dove with us. We gave the service to many private yachts with influencers.
Scooby
Iguana gave the service to private yachts to take them to dive from United States and other parts on Earth. And so we gave a lot of service to famous people and rich people.
So is that how you ended up becoming the go-to guide for private yachts here? Because of the history of service?
Sometimes casualty of life, what happened in the 90s, there were only maybe 8 or 10 dive guides, and somehow one of the beautiful private yachts came in with, what was the name of that yacht, but basically there was a very, very influential and powerful man on board. His name is, because he's still alive, Greg McCall. He owned one of the big cellular phone companies in the United States. And he was looking for a guide, dive guide and land guide. He asked me if I can go with him, and then the whole thing started from there, because he recommended other people, other private yachts, and also camera teams. I was part of the IMAX movie '99 and this and that, you know. So camera teams from Germany, from BBC, from England, from Japan. And sometimes I worked also like cameraman for the Japanese television to film some footage, and yeah, I slipped into it, you know.
Because you had experience as a journalist in Germany, too.
Yes, I had some background because I had a education in journalism in Munich on the German journalism school, called, you know. So I had a good background, good teachers, so I could understand what they wanted for footage. So
You called me one time from Darwin, and it was long before any of the commercial boats had any communications that you could do that with. I think you were on the boat. I can't remember. Was it called Plan B? It looks like the big white submarine.
oh yes, this was from this very rich Russian guy, Andrei Melinchenko, one of the biggest bank owners in Russia. And I dove with him.
Was that boat called Plan B? Was that the name of it?
Yacht A.
Oh, okay. Got
It
it.
was looking like a submarine, but it was looking exactly like a submarine. Incredible, yeah, you know. Yeah, I mean, it was great, you know. I mean, we dove a lot. We saw the whale sharks, you know, and you know, I was
4 divers, right?
yes, 4 divers. Yeah, that was a privilege. And you know, so I dove with Paul Allen twice from Microsoft. You know, also Larry Ellison, Oracle Software, and
What happens when these private yacht owners come with divers who don't really have enough experience to dive Darwin and Wolf? Are you holding on to them the whole time? What happens?
tricky, you know. Wolf and Darwin is not an easy place, and some of those divers didn't have enough experience, you know. Difficult. We were lucky that everything worked out well, but our suggestion, like guides, was because there was another problem that the tender drivers didn't know very well the sites, so they couldn't follow very well the divers, the bubbles, because they are not from Galapagos. So after some kind of tricky moments in the water, and that the tender drivers couldn't find us for a longer time, we decided that maybe it would be a great suggestion to convince the national park that the private yacht goes together with the local dive yacht and the local tender drivers who know the places, you know. And that changed then, you know, so the private yachts couldn't go anymore by their own to Wolfendauen.
When was that?
End of the 90s, beginning of 2000. I'm not very good with years. Too many years have passed.
I love pangeros. I mean, they just amaze me with their eyes.
The local pangeros, ex-fishermen,
Yeah.
they know very well where the bubbles are.
Oh, yeah.
Because they were also driving the speedboats when the lobster catches were on the water, you know. So they know.
It was their family. It was their friends that they were looking after.
Very good tender drivers.
They're amazing. Anyway, I remember you telling me one time about getting left maybe at Wolf on the surface for a long time. How long was it?
That was when the tender driver lost us from the private yacht, from Mr. Paul Allen, Tatouche. That was 97, I remember that, yeah, 97, because he was here in 97, and the wildlife was not like other years because we had El Nino on 97, and so wildlife was okay, but not enough for the expectations of Paul Allen, and that's why we dove here, and later we moved up to Coco Islands to dive another 8 or 10 days in Coco Islands. So yeah, the tender diver lost us, and then a long time we were waiting in Wolf on the surface, surrounded by big Galapagos sharks, and then lucky the tender of Aggressive Fleet picked us up.
Wow.
They found
How
us.
long were you there?
2 hours maybe.
Wow.
Well.
And what happened with the Galapagos sharks? You were just hitting them with your fins, or?
Yeah, I was chasing them away with my underwater camera, not
Yeah.
to get too close to this very important personality, like Paul Allen, It was like, that he feels good.
I mean, silkies are one thing, but Galapagos sharks at
Big
the surface.
ones on Wolf, big
Yeah.
Galapagos sharks.
I know. Wow. Okay. What other really sort of, adventures like that, shall we call it? Close calls, whatever you want to call it. Have you had?
Myself was trying out new dive site, Bajo Orca, in Floriana, close to Roca Elefante and Gardner Rock. I was trying to scout out the reef over there that I saw on the map, and that was a beautiful reef on the water. It is a reef, Bajo Orca. It looks like kicker rocks on the water, and I tried it out. I was the first when I jumped in from our boat, and there was a down current, and it took me down to 220 feet, and really terrible. I thought really that I'm going to die, but I could get out of it, and that's why I'm still here. But that was, I would say, one of the most scary moments that I thought, that's it, So that was in 97, and I think so the currents were strong like that because of El Nino.
The fishermen have always told me about, especially that backside away from port in Floriana, they called them
La botella.
azules. Azules. They said that, the current coming in from open ocean hits the wall and just goes down. They call them azules.
Well, that was a kind of interesting experience. I basically was reborn after that and took very wise decisions in my life after that.
Yeah. That is scary. That is scary. I haven't been dragged down that far. I've been dragged to 110 feet without noticing it, but, that's not scary.
That was bad.
Anyway, okay, so in the early days, going back to safety, were there accidents? And I don't remember the year Gabriel opened the chamber, do you?
Yeah, well, I never had an accident in my dive group, after many years of diving.
Wow.
Lucky, maybe good divers, who knows. I never had a tricky situation like a guide with all the millionaires that I took around. But in our dive shop, of course, we had like 3,500 clients per year, and of course some of them had like minor accidents, some of them tougher accidents. Also, Aggressive Fleet had some accidents, not with me like a guide, but my friends who were the guides had difficult situations with divers. Well,
But even before all that, like in the 80s, when people were coming here and diving, there was no organization to it. It was just each trip was organized individually.
Yeah, but I didn't hear about any serious dive accidents in that time.
That's what I'm asking, but they were good divers.
Exactly. I mean, the Europeans that came, they were really good divers, very conscious, well trained. And I mean, like a dive guide, you need to be sharp like a knife and in very good physical conditions to keep up with those folks. They were professionals, tough like a rock. But then it got too easy to get the dive license, okay? And then the weaker divers came to enjoy the waters of Galapagos, not being 100% prepared for this waters and currents.
That was more daily dives.
Yeah,
Both?
well, both. I saw also several week divers, many week divers on aggressor. It's tricky if you want to fill up the boat and make money and bringing in some people not so experienced. You know, you say, whatever, the guy takes care of you, you know. So I would say now, because it's so easy a dive course, that the dive guides are not anymore 100% dive guides. They are babysitters on the water. Right, it's very tough to be today a dive guide in Galapagos because the level of diving is really low. Even people with a license like dive masters are not great divers anymore because they have done that course in a very short time in Otila, in warm waters, like a jacuzzi swimming pool conditions. So if somebody comes up from over there saying, I'm a dive master from Otila, all right, okay, let's see. It's too easy now to get the license, and that is putting much more pressure on the whole industry, especially on places with difficult currents, cold water, 7mm wetsuits, down currents, big animals.
How do you think things have changed here in terms of the diving? And I mean, obviously the industry has grown, but I mean, I remember you talking with me one time many years ago and saying that you thought there were fewer sharks at Darwin and Wolf now than there were when you were there in the 90s.
Yeah, I think so. It's if you can compare what you saw before and what you have now, of course, it's still very impressive for a diver to come and see in Wolf and Darwin 200 hammerhead sharks passing over you.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really still very impressive, you know, on the end of all. But for sure that we had thousands of them in the 80s, you know, over 1,000 hammerhead sharks in one dive, maybe.
That still happens sometimes.
Yeah, it still happens, but not so often like before, because we had also more sharks in the central part of Galapagos, and we had illegal fishing activities for several years, and we have on the border of the marine reserve now a huge Chinese fleet. So we don't know exactly what they're doing. We don't have the power of coast guarding operation or helicopters or drones to control, to understand what's going out of the borders of the marine reserve, what's going on over there. But we know that people are fishing a lot, you know.
Yeah.
And I think so. We're learning that sharks are migratory animals. They go to Costa Rica, they go to Malpelo, and once they leave the marine reserve, of course, they're exposed. And so, in other words, we have seen less animals. Still great. I mean, if a diver comes, and if a diver who never dove before here, and if he sees a nice group in clear water of 50, 60 hammerhead sharks passing over his head, of course, it's still it's an outstanding experience, of course. But he was not here in the 80s, and he didn't saw it was in the 80s. It's still incredible to dive in Galapagos, you know. Because I was in Cuba, I was in Italy, I was in Hawaii. Gosh, you know. All this fish that I saw in my life in other places, I saw it in one dive in Galapagos, you know. So it's still incredible. Galapagos is still a knockout, you know. I hope for many years more. It's still a great place. We have less sharks here and there, you know, but still nice schooling sharks and whale sharks.
It's still the largest biomass of sharks in the world.
Yeah, even with all the problems that we have.
Yep.
It's a jewelry. We still have a jewelry.